All right, so good evening, everyone. Dan Gordon from Flash Fire, our last seminar for this winter, recording it. So if you know anyone that wants to watch it and isn't able to tune in, I will upload it. With me this evening is Matt Hunt from Sterling. So Matt, thanks so much for joining us. I will give a quick introduction on what we're going to do tonight, and then I'll, as some of the seminars have been on a lot of other people, tonight is going to be on Matt. I'll have some input when we get into some of the training stuff and equipment matching, if you will, but I'm hoping to learn a lot tonight as well about how some of the Sterling products made. And it's one of those products too that it's almost like the old commercial BASF. I think it was, if even if you don't own that product, you own something they make. And in the fire service, that's kind of the way Sterling is too. You'll own a lot of product that you don't realize Sterling makes or has a big hand in. So we'll talk about that stuff tonight as well. So my main focus tonight, I have a Word document I made for myself and Matt, but questions, that's the big thing. Anything you guys want to know. We're obviously going to go through all the Sterling stuff, some of the high angle ropes, but then focus on Bailout, the roof rope thing they have, and then search ropes, a little bit of everything on that end. So I could talk, but Matt will probably do a better job than me. So Matt, if you want to just kind of introduce yourself as a person, if you will, and then talk about Sterling as a company, I think that'd be a great way to kind of start the program off.
Yes, sounds great. Thanks for having me. And I guess just as a matter of housekeeping, Dan, how much time do we have?
I don't have a clock, so
okay.
We'll go. If we have questions, we'll keep going, and go from there. So if someone needs to tune off, it'll be recorded. They can always come back. So as long as we cover what we want, we're good.
Okay. And then can folks unmute themselves, or is it better to use the chat function? Or?
So as Matt goes tonight, most guys like to use the chat function, so you can just type it into the chat, come to me. If it's something you do want to actually verbalize or talk with Matt, I have no problem with that as well. But historically, most guys just end up putting a question in the chat. Since I'm not the one talking the whole time, I monitor that, and I can certainly record that to you. So
cool.
So you don't have to worry about the chat. I'll take care of that. And if there's questions, I'll put everyone together. So go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Dan. So my name is Matt Hunt, and I work up here at Sterling. I've been here for, I think this will be my 15th year. And I guess introduced as a person. So I got started at Sterling because I had a background as a recreational rock climber and doing a little bit of kind of search and rescue work, wilderness kind of stuff. And so I thought Sterling would be a cool place to work because they made the ropes that I was climbing on. So I put an application in, and they weren't hiring on that side, but they said, hey, we do have a job opening over here on the rescue side of the house if you've got interest in that. And I said, it sounds close enough to me, and off we went. So I started off kind of answering the phones and doing a little bit of everything. And I've spent my entire career here working on what we consider to be the professional side of the house. And that's changed a little bit over the years. We've done lots of different things. But historically, for all the years I've been here, I've worked with the fire service. Just to be upfront, I'm not a fireman. I've never been in the fire service. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that you guys do, but I won't try to pretend anything I'm not. But along the way, we've also worked with pretty much anybody who works at height. So tower climbers, search and rescue guys, confined space technicians. We do some military and kind of tactical work. I just got back from a NATO mountain warfare symposium in Vermont, which was pretty wild. It's the first time I'd ever seen a 50 caliber mounted to a sled that you can drag around behind you. So it's super fun. Honestly, I love my job. I get to dabble with all sorts of things and talk to all sorts of interesting people. So tonight's just another chance to do that. So along the way, lots of things with Sterling, but I think mostly what we'll probably focus on tonight is the personal escape system side of the house, which is a a bit of a specialty of ours and an area that I think we've kind of excelled over the years. So looking forward to sharing any information I can with you guys. If you've got questions, definitely throw them at Dan, and be happy to shout about them. I'm good with Sterling stuff, and I'm got enough knowledge to be dangerous with a lot of other manufacturers as well. So if you have questions, don't feel like this is a Sterling only show. I'm happy to help with anything I can on that side of things.
Yeah, and I think I compare you very much to in a fire service side. I don't know if you've heard of him, but Dan Madrikowski from UL, who is just a savant when you talk about fire behavior, the chemistry of that. Never a fireman, so won't tell you how to do your job, but knows the science and the technology behind that stuff. And so again, and you're very upfront about that, which works very well from what I've seen with when firefighters or fire departments come to you for advice. So so that's you. Talk a little bit about Sterling. If someone's never heard of Sterling, which probably most people here have, but what is Sterling? And then also with the acquisition the last couple, what was it, probably 2 years ago, where does that fall into play? I think that a lot of people don't even realize that acquisition happened. So talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. And actually, Dan, I do have a couple slides if I can share those. Looks like I'm blocked from sharing.
No. Yep. I will get that going. Of course, I should have done that before, but where was that? I just have to make you a. That's not. Yeah, I just have to make you a co-host. And there it is. Yeah, all right. Hold on one sec. Get it 1 minute. All right, you should be good now. Yep, there you go.
Awesome. And bear with me 1 sec here.
Oh, perfect.
Cool. So you guys can see my screen, yeah?
Yes, I can see it. Yep.
Perfect. So let's click through. We talked about the agenda. So yeah, a little background on Sterling. So it was started back in 1992, husband and wife team. And it's a small industry. It's a small world, I guess. So the husband of this couple, his name was Willie, worked for New England Ropes down in Massachusetts, kind of just outside of Boston. And his area of responsibility was making their recreational rock climbing rope line of products. So early 90s, rock climbing was a pretty fringe kind of thing. And he put his hand up and he said, guys, I've got some ideas. I think we can do this better. We can make some new products that'll be really interesting, really cool. And I'd like to tackle it. And they said, you know what, Willie, recreational rock climbing is never going to take off. Why don't you just go back to your corner there and just make the same things you've always made? And, I'll give the man a lot of credit. He said, I don't think that's the case. So he struck out on his own, started his own company with his wife. And so they founded Sterling in 1992. And they started down in Marblehead, Massachusetts. And they outgrew their facility within a couple of years, and they moved to a town called Scarborough up here in Maine, where we are today. Built a factory up there, sort of victims of their own success, rapidly outgrew the factory that they had built up here. And so, gosh, probably 18 years ago, bought this new building in a town called Biddeford, which is where we are today, and moved the whole operation down there. We've been there ever since. So we've got probably about 100,000 square feet-ish of manufacturing capacity out there. Lots of machines moving lots of fiber around and making lots of really cool rope. So we've got a couple of company firsts along the way. So we were the first ones to make 100% polyester life safety rope, which is our HTP, still really well known, well used within the rescue industry. We were the first ones to get into heat resistant Technora ropes. And that was actually driven by an incident down in Massachusetts. You're mostly probably all familiar with the Worcester cold storage fire. Those firemen became disoriented and lost, and it sort of spurred interest in having some heat resistant search ropes that they could use to navigate their way back out of a situation like that. And then we started getting into hardware and manufacturing complete systems for certain applications. So we were the first ones with a spring-loaded anchor hook. As Dan mentioned, and we'll cover some of this other stuff, we make rope for other kits and manufacturers and things like that. So we make the rope that goes into the PSS of the New York City Fire Department. And then we get tapped for projects that sort of suit our unique talents. So we'd had good success with New York City on their escape ropes for firefighters. And so they asked us to help them develop a new roof rescue rope when that time came around. So we've currently fielded, Dan might know better than I do, but there's probably several dozen of these new heat resistant roof rescue ropes that are out in the field right now. And they're just training guys up on them, getting them sent out to the rest of them. And then, as Dan mentioned, back in 2020, the original founders of Sterling said, it's been a good run, but we want to buy a boat and sail off into the sunset here. So they decided to sell the company, and they sold it to an outfit that's probably the best known outside facing version of this is a company called Sherrill Tree, which is the largest arborist equipment supplier in the country, in the world now, actually. And so we got rolled up with those guys. For me, who'd been there for a long time, it was a little bit scary. I'd worked for the same people for 12, 13 years at that point. And it's been nothing but good things. They brought a ton of expertise and resources into the business. We've been doing some really big, exciting things since the acquisition. So it's only been growth and positive. So it was a great thing. So I actually wear two hats. I have a name tag that says Vertical Supply Group, and I work on that side of the business. And then I continue to wear my Sterling name tag and sell Sterling rope as well.
What I always like to bring up, and you can answer kind of on this, is, and not to interrupt, but like the fire service always thinks, and this is every industry, not just rope, that the whatever company they're buying from revolves around them, right? Like I'm buying a Draeger meter, and Draeger makes everything for the fire service. Or Sterling, I'm buying a rope, they make everything for the fire service. So when you break down the fire service versus arborist versus whatever else, where does the fire service even fall in the Sterling cache?
Yeah, so this is a little slide that sort of shows the areas that we work in. It's got our mission statement on there. But it's a working at height company is where we sort of see ourselves being of value to our customers. So a huge part of that is the arborist industry. Honestly, that's probably about 80% of the business. Prior to the acquisition, it was probably 10% of the business.
Okay.
And then we probably go roughly half and half between, and we're always teasing each other about a little bit, roughly half and half between the recreational side of the business. So that's our rock climbing friends down here, which was my roots. And then what we would consider to be the professional side of the business. So that's going to be these three. So rope access and tower climbing, search and rescue, and the fire service. So the fire service probably makes up, let's call it 30% of the business in just rough and tumble round numbers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, cool.
So let's see, Dan, what else did we have?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I would get, so we covered Sterling. I would get, again, anyone, if you have any questions as we go tonight, just put them up there. But talk about the manufacturing process of all ropes, whether you're talking about high angle ropes or bailout ropes, whatever. What goes into making a rope? And one of the things that I've learned is you can't just say like, hey, click A and let's make this rope, right? So
Yeah.
Sometimes the delays don't come from I mean, sometimes it's certainly we can't get this, but sometimes it's just we have our machines set up for this. You go back to New England rope. I know that one of the issues there was always FDNY wanted the left laid rope for the life-saving rope, and that took an act of God to change the facility. So what goes into making ropes on a molecular level, if you will?
Sure. So probably the easiest way to do that is we'll go backwards. So this would be a finished rope. This one's actually a fire service rope. It's a personal escape rope. This one happens to be a little 8mm, but they're all, the scale is the same. The process is the same. So the ropes that we manufacture and are typical in the rescue world are considered kern mantle ropes. And that just means it's a rope made out of 2 parts. So sorry, we'll get the camera zoomed in here.
Very good.
So the 2 parts are, we can pull them apart here. There we go. So the yellow part on the outside would be the mantle or the cover or the sheath, lots of sort of interchangeable terms in there. And then on the inside would be the cores. And so this particular rope is made up of 4 separate cores, right? So these are the white parts. And then the sheath is going to be this yellow part here. And historically speaking, that sheath was just there. All the load bearing capacity would be in the cores. And then the sheath was there just to provide some protection to those cores and also to sort of help it keep that round shape. So what we do is we're going to assemble all these fibers together to get the performance that we want at the end. And then they go into, it's called a braider. It's a braiding machine. And it's going to braid these sheath yarns in this X pattern over these cores that we've built at a different part of the process. So that's the historic version of how kern mantle ropes work. Load bearing cores, sheath that's just kind of there to protect them and keep it round. That's changing as we go through and evolve here. So if anybody's familiar, historically speaking, we've always thought of life safety rope. If we look to the NFPA, comes in 2 versions. There's that general use, and then what used to be called light use, but is now called technical use. So the number for general use was always 9,000 pounds. And so if you wanted to have a general use rope, it had to be 9,000 pounds, and it was 1/2 inch. That 1/2 inch number is actually not contained within the NFPA anywhere. That was just kind of where it happened to be. To get a 9,000 pound rope, you had to have a 1/2 inch worth of fiber, basically. But as we get smarter and better at our job, we are able to make the sheath actually carry some of that load. So now we can get a 9,000 pound capacity out of a smaller rope. So we can now make an 11 or 7/16 for those of you using Freedom units. We can make a smaller rope that still meets the strength requirements of a general use certification, if that makes sense.
So you're jumping ahead, but you're on the right topic. So let's just get right into it.
Sure, pulling that through.
No, NFPA. Where are we at with the standards? And just kind of go into that again. The 15:1, the 1/2 inch, all that stuff. And you know, I'm gonna keep I want to do like 10-15 minutes on this because I want to get into the bailout side. But
Sure.
This is absolutely a huge topic now. Where are we at with NFPA for high angle rope? Your high angle rope, a lot of departments going to 11 mil, all that stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll give you a free cookie here if anybody can shout it out. But historically, the NFPA standard that governed life safety ropes and rescue equipment for the fire service was 1983, right? 1983, as I learned, is nothing to do with the year the standard was released. It just happens to be the next number in line that they had available when they were numbering the standard. So it's been 1983 forever and a day. And this standard is supposed to be updated every 5 years. And for anybody who's interested, anybody out in the world can view the standard as it's being written and as it's being updated. And you can submit comments if there's things you'd like to see changed in the standard. And then the committee is obligated to review those and address them, either incorporate them into the standard or not. And then they update it every 5 years. So historically, what we did was we numbered the standard on the year that it went into effect. So we're currently in the 22 edition. Prior to that would have been the 2017 edition. Prior to that would be the 2012 edition, so on and so forth. However, for this year, we've decided to roll the 2500. So 2500 now includes 1983, which was the manufacturing side of NFPA, but we're also including 1670 and 1858. So these are the kind of training and certification requirements that would be adjacent to the equipment side of things. So all these things that are meant to work together are now being all put into one document. So the take home point of that is if you're used to seeing 1983 referred to for equipment and stuff like that, you're going to see it as 2500 parentheses 1983 for the next 5 years. And then we're going to drop this 1983 and it'll just all be 2500. So that's sort of like the update on NFPA these days, just in terms of what it actually looks like if you have a piece of equipment. And there we go, there's one. So here's a piece of equipment. It's got an NFPA stamp on there. I don't know if you can see it up at the top. And this one's going to be, this was 2012 edition. So going forward, we'll no longer see that 1983 stamp and we'll see a 2500 stamp. So the numbers I've got on here are specific to escape ropes, but I guess to answer Dan's question, I guess was more along kind of like trends within the rope world. Is that accurate, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, we'll definitely touch on personal escapes. So like I said, I want to go up to 730 or so. High angle, how has that changed? You talked about general use, all that stuff. I don't know even that, so educate me.
Okay. So organize my thoughts for a second here. I guess there's two sort of interesting things happening. One is on the equipment side and one is on the technique side. And they both go hand in hand. They're married together, right? One doesn't change without the other. So on probably the easiest one to address is on the technique side of things. So when I got started, everybody was, pretty much on board with, you have a 2-rope system, nothing's changed there. And we had a main line and then we had a belay line, right? And so the concept here is, if something terrible happens to our main line and it gets cut, then we've got this backup in place, right? Everybody was pretty good with that. What's happened over the past, let's call it 5 years, is there's been a lot of research and sort of interest in what happens when you fail that main line. And what we found is some really terrible things happen because there's a drop, right? So that main line's under tension. So if we part that, then that load, those people, humans on the end, are going to drop as the belay line or the backup. It may not be perfectly tight, and then it has to stretch and elongate, and all that load has to transfer over to it. So there's been lots of interest in what happens if we just have 2 ropes in the system that are more or less equally weighted, and what does that do for our system? And the findings have been that in that case, if we just part one of them, then it's a very gentle transfer onto that second rope. So lots of folks are sort of moving in this direction of going to what's called a twin tensioned or a dual system. There's sort of like competing terminology out there. You also hear them described as mirrored systems. So 2 identical systems right side by side with each other. So that's been, from my viewpoint, sort of the transition technique wise these days. And a lot of that's driven by equipment. So there's been some really cool devices that have come to market and been developed, like the CMC clutch or the Maestro from Petzl, which allow you to really easily build these systems that are easily duplicated, and they function as both a lowering and a raising system without having to transition. I don't know, I may be dating myself a little bit, but we used to have to do these fairly complicated transitions with, you had to take your brake bar rack out of the system and transition it with a Munter Mule system to lower it down and move it over and turn it into a raising, and it's very complicated. Now you can pretty much do it right on the fly, no changes needed.
Now on your end, have you changed how you construct ropes? And guys, I promise if you're here just for bailout or search, we will get to that in a couple minutes. But have you changed how you construct ropes? I know you have the sync, high angle ropes. Other than just going to narrower ropes that can also take the load, have you changed construction because of any of this, or not really?
Not really. Most of the changes to construction are pretty iterative. So we'll make small tweaks along the way, depending on what the solution is that we're trying to arrive at. So if the problem is, too much elongation in the system, then we can select different fibers. We can twist them in a different way to create a rope that gets to the way we want it to be. But in general, the technique of making kern mounted ropes hasn't really changed that much. Okay. The modifications are pretty small. So to piggyback on your comment about this transition from these 1/2-inch ropes to these lighter weight, smaller diameter ropes, I see a lot of that as being driven actually from the wildland firefighting world. And let's say, especially out west, California, places like that, Montana, any of the Intermountain region, a lot of these guys are being tasked with doing rescue work essentially in the backcountry. And so they've shown up on these scenes, and they've had to drag their heavy steel carabiner, half-inch rope kind of setups that have always been perfectly suitable in an urban environment where you can drive a 10-ton truck to wherever you're going. And they're starting to say, oh gosh, this is not ideal if we have to carry it, a mile or two into the backcountry. And so they're really looking for that quiver of one. Like, how can I buy a rope that's going to serve both purposes? Is it robust enough to use in that standard urban environment with a acceptable amount of safety, but also can I lighten my load when I actually have to carry it somewhere? And I think that was the driver of it, but we're also finding applications for it in lots of places. So anybody who does tower rescue, where you have to actually carry the kit up the tower with you, some of these like tower cranes that have to be evacuated, things like that. You talk to the guys down in Orange County, they've got a super cool program in terms of amusement park ride rescue. And same thing, they're having to carry these packs around with all this gear in it. So anything they can do to lighten that load for themselves, especially if they're, evacuating 300 people off a Ferris wheel in the middle of the summer in Florida, they're pretty keen to shed weight wherever they can.
So and I'll let you finish up with this. The sync rope, that's a newer product for you guys. So if a department out there is saying, hey, we need high angle ropes, what's the sync rope? What's the advantage of it? Give the sales pitch for a couple of minutes, then we'll move on to bailout and search.
Sure. I'll give a sales pitch, and then I'll give you the other side of it too, right? So like,
Please.
nothing's free. So the sync is our product. That's the 11 millimeter G-rated rope. So it's going to meet all the requirements of NFPA for general use, which is the highest, most robust requirements. And the real number there, like I mentioned, is 9,000 pounds is the target they're shooting for there. So with some, creativity in terms of how we braid it and the fibers that we use, we're able to hit that mark. So the trick is, for anybody who's considering possibly trying to lighten up their load by switching from a half-inch to a 11 millimeter, and they want to stay within the NFPA general use. Let's be clear, there's lots of 7/16 ropes out there that are still NFPA. They're just technical use, and by no means are they any less safe than anything else out there. But for some people, it's certainly convenient to just say, yeah, everything is general use rated. So if you're considering making that transition and looking at the sync as, hey, can we lighten things up a little bit here? It's no more expensive than a half-inch rope, for one thing. It's going to have the same braking strength to it, but the things you'll have to be careful about are equipment compatibility. So like a lot of descent control devices, like the Petzl ID is the classic descent control device that's been around forever. There's two versions of that, right? There's a half-inch version and there's a 7/16 version. So if you've got a whole bunch of half-inch IDs in your rescue cache, you can't just slap an 11 millimeter rope in there and be off and running. You're then going to have to transition your descent control devices as well. So it's a system, right? These are rope rescue systems. And so we need to make sure that all the parts are compatible with each other and they function appropriately. The other piece of that, weight savings is great. We certainly like that. But the one thing that you do lose when you switch diameters like that is cut resistance goes down. So really the only thing, you can do some things with fancier fibers, which we'll talk about a little bit, but the best thing for making a rope resistant to cutting and abrasion is just to make it bigger. So if you go from a half-inch to a 7/16 rope, there's just less rope there to be resistant to any sort of cutting or damage. So I'll always point that out to people. Say, what kind of work do you guys do? They say, oh, we drive the truck right up to the top of the parking garage and rescue the window washers. That's our like bread and butter maneuver. There's probably no value to be gained from buying a whole bunch of new descenders and a whole bunch of lightweight rope for that one. So always ask them to weigh the pros and cons.
Cool. Awesome. So I have a really good question from someone, but it's about this stuff. I'm going to save it to the end because I want to get to some of the stuff we want. And honestly, he's a good friend too. So if we don't get to it, I'll just hook you two up and you can kind of digress into that. So I do want to get into bailout, obviously. So yeah. How did Sterling get into bailout? One of the things I'll mention before we get into it is everyone says, oh, I want what FDNY has. And as we'll talk, you can't get that. So how did that come? Where did it come from? Because FDNY, what we use is we have a Sterling rope with a Petzl device and a Crosby hook. And you can't even get a Crosby hook really as of maybe a few months from now.
Yeah. Yep.
Petzl device, I'm not aware of them selling Petzl devices by themselves. You can get a Sterling rope by themselves, but so I don't think were you with Sterling when that came about or no? I'm sorry, no?
Sorry, just after.
Okay, so, but I'm sure you know the history. So, tragically, Black Sunday happens, guys jump out the window, and where does it go from there? Honestly,
Sure.
I'm not even asking just to quiz. I don't even know how Sterling got involved, how Petzl got involved, how Crosby got involved. So take it away from there. Where did bailout come from?
Yeah, sure. So I would guess that most people in the fire service are familiar with the Black Sunday event of January 23rd, 2005. But this is sorry, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a graphic that came out of some of the after action reporting that they looked into. And, if we're going to touch on bailout systems, I think one of the things that's sort of important, not for me to talk about, but for the rest of you guys to talk about, is what are all the things that happen that lead up to a requirement for a bailout. So, we know Black Sunday, we ended up with 6 firefighters trapped at the, 4th or 5th floor, depending on how you look at it, cutaway grade and all. But they really shouldn't have been in that. It shouldn't have been a problem other than a couple things went wrong. The building had been illegally subdivided. There were some electrical problems in there, and it was really, really cold that day. So these guys that probably should have had water with them to put out the fire didn't have access to that. So it was a whole bunch of things that combined to cause a tragedy. So if everything goes right, then bailout systems should never be needed, right? But life doesn't always go perfectly. So to answer Dan's question specifically, so after the events of Black Sunday, the city of New York is fortunate in their size and scale. They have the resources. They launched this big project and said, never again. We're gonna equip these guys to solve this problem. And they, more or less out of thin air, created a whole bunch of new products, which is kind of amazing. So it kind of boiled down to, let's call it 4 pieces. So there was an anchoring piece, there was a rope piece, there's a descender, a controlled descender, and then a harness. And you can throw in the carrying bag, the storage bag piece of it as well. Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that at that point, all FDNY firefighters were wearing a harness already. So they sort of said, okay, we've already got a thing that we can attach ourselves to. So that's sort of taken care of.
I'm not sure. I was in high school, so I'm not sure exactly what they were wearing then. I know that there was a time where harnesses and rope were issued, and then it kind of became it didn't get supported, and so a lot didn't have them. I know that some guys up there, because Rescue 3 was part of it, some of those guys had their own harnesses, makeup systems. For those of you that think a body belay bailout system is the answer, 1 or 2 of them had that and it failed. Whether it was because I don't want to say they failed, they weren't able to hold it, or it scraped on the side or whatever. The body belay did not succeed that day. And so for any department that thinks, oh, the body belay is going to be our end all be all, I would highly recommend that you reconsider that, because that was proven false that day.
And we deal with that question a lot.
Yeah.
Folks will say, can I guess get away with, just a piece of rope in my pocket, and we'll do the body wrap that most of us are probably familiar with. And the answer to that is, yeah, it does work sometimes on a good day for somebody who's had a lot of practice. Maybe there's not actually a fire there, and you've got a couple of your buddies standing around kind of helping you out, coaching you through. Yeah, it could work. But nobody uses these kinds of things on those days. They use them on the worst possible day of their entire, let's not even say career, but possibly worst day of their entire life, when absolutely everything has gone terribly wrong. And then, from my perspective, what I end up talking to folks a lot about is, we'll go meet with a city and they'll say, hey, what do you got? And we'll show them. And what do? They trot out their 5 rope gurus that they've got on the department there out of 1,000 guys, 1,000 people. And they say, oh, these guys can make this work no problem. They can do it with a body belay. Like, yeah, I'm sure they can. You've got 9,000 and you've got 990 other firefighters who also need to be able to do this. And that's where the descender piece of it comes into play, right? So FDNY says, great, we need an anchoring option. And they developed this hook, which allows them to anchor both at the windowsill and inside the building. They worked with a company called Petzl to modify an existing piece of climbing hardware into a descent controller that would work on a smaller diameter rope because they wanted to make the system really small and compact. And then because of the experience that we'd had after that Worcester cold storage fire making heat resistant ropes for search, they came to us and said, can you use that expertise to provide us with a life safety rope that we can use for personal escape? And then the city was able to mate those 3 pieces together, hook, rope, and descender, to create a system that worked for those guys. And that was really the genesis of it. There wasn't a whole lot of designed systems available to firefighters at that time.
I don't think there was anything at the time, really. Frankly, that's why Petzl, Sterling, and Crosby all teamed up.
Yeah. So that was sort of the genesis of it. And the city spent a ton of money outfitting everybody, training everybody, going through that whole process. And they were really, head and shoulders above kind of the rest of the world at that point.
So I'll just back up for those of you that, you can say the city's head and shoulders above everyone else at that point, but let's put everything in perspective. The only reason we got bunker gear was the fire in Lower Manhattan, the Drennan fire, where guys in 3/4 jackets and boots or 3/4 boots, long jackets got burned to death. They said, hey, we need bunker gear. And the only reason we had bailout systems was because Black Sunday happened. So everything in the fire service is reactive. That said, there's a lot of, and I get it, and I'm going to cut that off here. I get pushback all the time with, why do we need bailout systems? Why don't we just put the fire out? Why don't we just not do this or that? And they're right. If we put the fire out, we don't have to bail out the window. I think that's an Andy Fredericks old quote from the early 2000s. But I always bring it back. Bailout systems, I equate it to seatbelts, right? I don't put my seatbelt on so that I can drive like a lunatic. I put it on in case something happens. I already have my seatbelt on and it saves me. And it's the same thing with the bailout. I don't put it on so that I can push deeper without water and make a more aggressive search. I use it as a seatbelt. I act the same as I do every day, but if something changes, I have that on me as an escape device. That's how I see my bailout system. And I think for those of you that are out there that maybe want them and can't sell your Chiefs on them, that's the most successful way I've seen to kind of discuss with them. So
yeah. So I think we would do history a disservice if we don't give FDNY the credit due for the work they did in rolling this out as a program, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to go buy myself a rope and Dan's going to buy himself a carabiner or something like that. So what we can do though is we can fast forward here to, I'm going to get my dates wrong. Let's call this 2019, somewhere around there.
Clackamas? Yeah, okay.
Sure. So this one was really interesting. So this is Clackamas, Oregon. And this is actually a YouTube video. I'm not going to play it for you. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. But these guys got a call middle of the night. The place was a couple blocks from the firehouse. So they were there, right away. They show up and there's somebody comes running down the driveway, says, my friend is stuck inside. You've got to go help. So as they do, the first 4 guys who'd shown up, 2 of them were sort of like all set to go. And actually, you can see it here. They popped the sliding door open. They charged in there. The other two guys stopped to put their masks on and get ready to go. And by the time they got masked up, this whole thing had kind of basically flashed on them, right? We put a bunch of oxygen in there. So these two guys inside, they're getting hot pretty fast as they're going up the stairs. And they said as they were going up the stairs, they could feel their boots sticking to the carpet on the stairs as it was melting under them. So when they got to the top of the stairs, they just dove through the first door that they could find and closed it behind them. And I guess luckily or fortunately, the woman they were looking for was in that room with them. And you can't see it in this picture, but it's a cutaway grade. So they're up here on the second floor, but it's really kind of almost 2.5 floors down to the ground here. And so they said in the time that they closed the door, sort of picked themselves up and kind of figured out what was going on, figured out she was there. They said the fire had started to eat through the top of the door already. And that it was a very clear, like, we're certainly not going back out that door. And these guys had just purchased escape systems and just finished training on them. So they popped the window out. The first guy hooked the sill, rolled out. The second guy actually picked this woman up who was sort of semi-conscious and just tossed her out the window. First guy who was hanging on his system caught her, kind of cradled her in his arms there. And there was some other folks had shown up at this point, and they were coming around the corner with a ladder. And they said the second guy rolled out the window, and it looked like he got shot out of a jet engine because the whole room just flashed right as he rolled out the window. Threw a ladder up, brought the lady down to the ground. Those two guys rappelled down to the ground. And I got to talk to them later, and I said, that's an absolutely amazing story. What did you guys do after you got down to the ground? And one of them looked at me and he said, oh, I picked up a hose and I went back to work. And I just thought that was the coolest thing that you could possibly say, because instead of this being some sort of tragedy where, okay, let's call ourselves a bunch of ambulances and, everything's gone to shit at this point. It worked exactly like it was supposed to work, where they were perfectly safe, perfectly fine, and they were able to get right back to work. And it was not to say it was a non-event, but it was the best possible outcome.
No, it's a tremendous story, a tremendous video. If you haven't watched it, you absolutely should. And the other thing I'll point out is, Matt always brings up our bailout systems, what they were made out of from the Black Sunday event. But every other time that bailout systems, to my knowledge, have been used, they've been used from the second floor of a dwelling. So you don't have to go and say, oh, we only have 2-3-story buildings, we don't need bailout systems. I'm not going to argue with you, but every time that they've been you will, every time they've been successfully used since Black Sunday, to my knowledge, has been 2- and 3-story buildings. I know FDNY's used them 2 or 3 times, and they were from 2-story buildings. And that said, they're not the end all be all. And we've had plenty of guys, unfortunately, jump from 2- and 3-story buildings with bailout systems on them. Either the fire progressed too quickly, or what they had earlier, the few years after bailout systems were issued, was guys that had 10-15 years on the job, never had bailout systems, now all of a sudden had them. That wasn't what their focus was, so it wasn't their go-to. And so they were caught in dangerous situations and just jumped because, hey, and they got down to the bottom and said, yo, you had a bailout system. Shit, I forgot. I haven't been trained in it, from the beginning. Whereas I'm lucky enough getting on an 08, it's been ingrained in my head. A buddy of mine texted me that's watching tonight, said when he went to his firehouse, they said, here, go to EMS sports store and buy this rope, this carabiner, and put something together, so I get it. This is not the end all be all. I want to move on. I want to talk about the Sterling stuff, specifically the ropes, the devices, the hooks. You've got a lot of them. So there's a few systems out there. Talk about the ropes, because that kind of goes to everything else, because there's a few systems that aren't Sterling branded that use Sterling ropes. So talk about bailout rope in general from Sterling. What do you got? You got
Sure.
2 or 3 now.
Yep. So actually, I'm just going to go off on my own here.
Please.
And, my job is to sell equipment. That's what I do. That's what, puts food on my table. But I will be 100% honest and tell you that all the equipment's going to do you absolutely no good without the training side of it. So, work with Dan if you can. He's a great guy. He does a great job. We've worked together a lot. But please understand that if you are interested or looking at purchasing equipment, the purchasing or the obtaining of the training side of it is, I'm going to say, more important than whichever gadget you choose, whether it be from us or from another manufacturer. So if you're looking at these things and figuring, I need X number of dollars per kit per firefighter, please also factor in the cost of training, however that may come about. So the gear is cool. I get excited about it. Other folks do too. But
I didn't make him say that tonight, but thanks, Matt.
I tell everybody that. So whether you're here or not. So yeah, it's actually, we had a funny little bit of a joke we were standing around at a trade show one time, and one of the folks that makes some of the hardware, the descender pieces, got in a little bit of a tiff with our former owner and said, yeah, the rope's not that important. The descender is really kind of the heart of the system. That's the important piece. And she was quick. She said, that may be true. I'll tell you what, we'll both go jump out the window and I'll get the rope and you get the descender and we'll see who does better. And so I think, all joking aside, the rope kind of really is the heart of the system. So I do have a slide here. There we go. So there's actually 2 versions of escape ropes according to NFPA. There are escape ropes, and then there are heat-resistant escape ropes. For my money, if you're in the fire service, I don't see much reason you should be looking at a escape rope that is not heat-resistant. The very nature of your job is to be in hot situations, so I kind of skip over that part of it. That being said, we do work with some, super low-budget volunteer operations, and we figure some rope is better than no rope. So that option is out there. They are lower cost and that sort of thing. But the vast majority of what we deal with are heat resistant escape ropes. And there's basically 2 models that we sell. So, and they're pretty easy to tell apart. So the first one is the FireTech is what we call it. And it's a 7.5 millimeter, which is the smallest diameter that's allowed under NFPA as an escape rope. And it's made out of 100% Technora fiber. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Technora is an aramid, so it would be in the same family with Kevlar, Twaron, there's a whole bunch of them in there. And the thing we like about it is it's super strong and it's also super heat resistant. It's the most heat resistant fiber you can get, sort of short of going to like a steel cable or something like that. So nylon will melt. Nylon is the most common fiber probably in life safety ropes. Nylon will melt at about 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And Technora breaks down at about 900 and change. Call it 900 for round numbers. So you can think of that as kind of double the heat resistance of nylon. So we talked about earlier kern mantle ropes, sheath and core. So FireTech is Technora sheath over a Technora core. So it's our longest possible burn through time. We also make this guy here, which is the SafeTech. It's actually the exact same sheath as the FireTech, but we put a nylon core inside of there. So it still passes all the NFPA requirements for a heat-resistant escape rope. It's a little bit lower cost because of the nylon. Technora is a cool fiber. It's also a very expensive fiber. So we can drive the cost of the rope down a little bit there. And the nylon is a little bit softer fiber, so it makes it a little bit easier to kind of pack it into a bag or stuff it into a pocket or something like that. So sort of a good and better type solution here, if that makes sense. So for anybody who's curious, as far as the NFPA is concerned, there are a couple of pretty basic requirements, which is it has to be 3,000 pounds for an escape rope. It has to be between 7.5 and 9 millimeters in diameter. And it has to be made of, they essentially say nylon or better. So it has to, the fiber has to melt at greater than 400 degrees What they do for heat resistant escape ropes, they actually have an oven, sort of like a big tube, and they'll put 300 pounds on the rope on the end of a wire, pull the wire up through this oven until the rope's inside the oven, and they'll cook it. So it has to last for, oh, I got my numbers wrong on there. 600 degrees, it has to last for 5 minutes. And then at 1100 degrees, it has to last for 45 seconds. So for those of you who are paying attention, I just told you Technora breaks down at 900 degrees, and they're putting it in an 1100 degree oven. So they're intentionally subjecting it to something they know is going to cause failure. So the whole idea with that is, do you have enough time to hang out the window for a little while and make something happen? Go back into it at a lower story, somebody throws you a ladder, swing the aerial around, whatever it is. But they wanted to have some sort of, apples to apples comparison for escape ropes to show some sort of heat resistance, seeing as how they'll be used on the fire ground.
And I hate to blow up Sterling's and the NFPA whatever, but we always talk about in our classes, guys, when you talk about the various ways you're going to use this escape system, you might hook the hook at the window, you might do a remote tie off. We show the remote tie off. We always talk about that it's always only been used at the window, and just think about the mechanics of that. I'm more concerned about abrasion resistance than heat resistance. And everyone says, but you're bailing out of a high heat environment. Yes. But if my hook's going on the windowsill, the entirety of my rope is out the window. And in the end, departments always ask, they say, what's the heat resistance, heat resistance, heat resistance? But I don't really care. I want an abrasion resistant rope, because for a bailout scenario, that's what I'm using it for. If I have time to tie off remotely, I'm either clairvoyant or I don't need to jump out the window yet. So, if I'm using the hook at the window, I just need something abrasion resistant to get over the sill, and then maybe get some glass in it, whatnot. But heat to me it's important, I guess, but it kind of runs hand in hand with durability. I'm not as concerned with the heat as I am with the abrasion resistance for the most part.
Yeah, and I think most of us have probably seen those diagrams in a textbook or at a training center.
Right.
If you look at a window and if you've cleared the glass out of it, then the top of the window is essentially whatever the maximum temperature of a room and contents fire is. I don't know, 1200 degrees or so. Yeah, Dan.
Right.
But down at the sill, it's almost impossible to get much over 400 degrees. So in my opinion, as long as, to Dan's point, most of the rope's out the window anyhow. And even if you are interior, it's still only 400 degrees at the sill. So as long as you got some sort of aramid in there, you're golden.
The bottom line is, when we go sail, I almost always sell the safe tech. It's very rare that I tell a department. I've never told a department, hey, you need the fire tech too. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, if FDNY said we don't need fire tech 2 anymore, you probably wouldn't make it anymore, because I don't think you probably don't have the demand for it outside of, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think you have the demand outside New York City.
There's certainly a lot of give me the best.
Okay.
I don't care, the cost isn't the issue. Give me the most, the strongest, the most heat resistant. So okay. And we'll have the same conversation, these both passed the test. These are the reasons why. And they say, nope, I'll take every inch of insurance I can get. So yeah, we give choices, let people make the decision.
Sounds good. So we covered the rope. Let's get to the device. And then I have all the hooks here too. Cool. But if you want to talk about the F4, FCX, and kind of go into those.
Of course. Stand by. Okay, so sort of talked about it a little bit, but basically there's 5 pieces to an escape system. So there's the rope, which we talked about, and then the descender is this piece that lets you go down that rope in sort of a controlled. Whoops, sorry, you guys can't see. So the descender is this piece here that lets you go down the rope in kind of a controlled fashion. So the most basic descender is you guys just grabbing it with your hands, and that works not that well. So we'll introduce some other friction mechanism in there. Probably the most classic one would be like a figure 8. nice and simple, lightweight, easy. The downside to a figure of 8 style device is if you let go of it, you go at exactly the speed gravity wants you to go. And again, like we said, worst day of your life, you may or may not remember to hang on to that as you're jumping out a window with your face piece melting off. So this device here is called an FCX, and I've got one in my hand here as well. But basically, it's a friction device. So we make friction by turning the rope around bends in something. That's how friction and ropes work together. And then there's a mechanism down in here that's going to bite on the rope unless you do something to it. So it's an automatic locking device. So you jump out the window, you let go, it just locks off and holds you there. And then to go down, you're going to grab this. Oh, I'll pull one out and show you. So this is our descender here. So this is our FCX. So to go down, this little handle is going to come out, and you pull that handle, and it'll let the rope slide down through the device. And as it just did, if you get partway down and you let go of it, it's just going to snap back into position and lock you off again. So pretty straightforward, easy to use. It doesn't do anything else particularly well. It is strictly a firefighter escape, go down a rope device. This is not an ascending device. This is sort of like very specific purpose, specifically designed to do that. The other thing that this one will do is if we pull this handle and we pull it too hard, so we're panicking and we're pulling as hard as we can because we're scared, this device will bite off on the backside as well. And it won't necessarily stop you, but it will slow you down. And we actually had a version that would come to a full stop if you pulled it too hard. And it was basically too finicky. Folks said, in this particular situation, I don't really care whether or not I stop. I just want to make sure I don't hit the ground at full speed. I just want to get out of whatever situation I'm in. So that's how we ended up designing it that way. So I'm a big fan of auto locking descenders. I don't think there's a reason to use any of the non-locking ones that might be out there, like figure of 8s and that sort of thing. So
that's why they're not NFPA compliant too for the standard. So
you can certify a figure 8 to NFPA to escape. Okay. Yeah, you can do it. I just think there's a practical reason to not use them.
I did not know that, so I learned something.
Oh, there we go. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it with the descender. This one that we manufacture, we like a lot. It's incredibly simple. It's only got 3 parts to it. It's got this locking plate here. It's got the handle and it's got the body. So they're going to come, these kits will come all pre-assembled, strung up, ready to go. And you guys set them up for yourselves and you'll be off and ready to go training at that point.
And when you say it, set it up for yourself, and I'll let you get into the hooks in a minute. One of the advantages, just hold up the device for me, is a lot of people will say, hey, I want, as I said, what New York City uses, and they'll want to wear their bailout system on the left-hand side. And that's not, and I'll get into this in a minute when we talk about compatibility, but what's nice about really every device other than the Petzl is that you can wear it on either side. And so just be aware of that. If you're looking at devices, the Petzl is only a right-hand carry. You can only wear it on your right-hand side, the way the rope weaves in. On this, the way Matt has it set up now, I believe it's a right-hand carry, but you can, but you can route it. You can pull the rope out and route it in the other way. So I'll get into that in a minute when we talk about compatibility, because that's one of the biggest issues I run into is departments that just kind of buy off of Amazon, lack of a better term, and don't have it. It's not compatible with what they have. So Matt, going to the hooks, what are we talking about with hooks here?
Sure. So we're actually going to take a little side trip here. So this is the rope. We talked about that. 50 feet is pretty standard. We do lots of 40 footers. You can lose 20% of your weight just by taking 10 feet off. 40 feet will still get you to the ground on most residential frame construction kind of things. But the way we attach the rope to the anchor is with a sewing operation. So as opposed to tying a knot in it. So as you guys probably know, anytime you tie a knot in a rope, you're going to lose somewhere between 25 and 50% of the strength of the rope. All depends on the type of knot, type of rope, so on and so forth. Sewn termination like this, which we do with a fancy CNC sewing machine at the factory. We're going to approach 100% of the strength of the rope. So if it's a 3,000 pound rope, the sewn termination is going to be in the neighborhood of 3,000 pounds. The other nice thing about it is you can't take it apart. So your buddy can't untie your escape system from your anchor hook and use it to tie up his dog or build a clothesline or whatever it is. So it's pre-built, it's sort of permanently attached. It can't be accidentally repurposed for anything else. So we like sewn terminations a lot. The thread we use is a heat resistant thread, same heat resistant fiber as we make the ropes out of. So this is the anchor hook here. So the one that we sell is called a Lightning GT. GT just stands for gated technology. So that's the quote unquote clippy thing on the back here. So it's kind of an interesting one to me. There's not really any other anchor shape available out in the world other than a hook. So it was the first one. They made the Crosby hook was the FDNY one. It's kind of the first anchor hook. And we've not really gotten too far away from that. It's just a shape and a design that seems to work pretty well. What we have added is this hitching slot in the back. So if you have a substantial object, radiator, standpipe, studs, whatever you can get a hold of, large furniture, what having that slot in the back allows you to do is you can pass it around that object and then you can clip the rope back into it. And now you've got a permanent loop, an actual fixed loop in here, as opposed to just trying to kind of drape the hook around a pipe or something like that. So the sort of older style would have been a solid gate without the spring in it. And you have to actually feed a bite of rope. Let's see if I can show this here. You have to feed a bite of rope through that and then kind of loop it up over the hook. It's a rather complicated process. There's also, if you want to get really into it, there's a technique that will allow you to lower somebody else using the hook as your friction device instead of the descender. Dan can get you trained up on that, but it's called a partner lower or a burn technique. Burn being Kelly Byrne, the Washington, DC firefighter who sort of cooked up that idea and kind of popularized it. So anchor hook, this one's aluminum, aircraft grade 7000 series aluminum. And the older hook styles were steel. So by switching to aluminum, we're losing some weight. So the old one was 12 ounces, this one's 8. So we lost about a third of the weight in there. So that's the Lightning GT, super cool. We've done really well with that one, but never ones to sit still and take our time. We've got the newer, fancier version here. Dan, you seen this one? Yeah. So this one we're calling the Stealth Hook. So we've lost 2 more ounces. We've gone from 8 to under 6. This one's a forged construction as opposed to a CNC construction, which allows us to get, I don't know if you can really see the texture on it, but it's basically sort of like a truss structure, kind of like a bridge that allows us to get the strength where we need it and lose the material where we don't need it. This one also has a removable stainless steel tip in it, which is super pointy, super sharp. So it'll dig into trim, drywall. It'll kind of chip itself into brick if that's what you're anchoring into. It provides a much more stable, more secure kind of anchor option. And then it's not permanent. It's in there with a little set screw. So you can actually take that set screw out and you can rotate that tip around once and get a fresh edge on it. So if you bang it up or blunt it in training, then you can switch it around and get a nice new sharp point on there. Honestly, you could probably also take a file and tidy it up too, but.
So I'm gonna touch on that because you mentioned training in a minute, but do you have this hook? You want to talk about the Crosby lookalike?
I don't have one of those.
All right, so talk about this, and then I'm gonna hit you on training. So go ahead.
Sure. So the one Dan's holding up is basically a mimic of the original anchor hook, which was made by the Crosby company, which is really more famous for making things like lifting shackles for cranes.
This is the Crosby hook, yeah.
So that one's forged steel. It's super heavy, super durable. But there was a request from actually from New York City. They said, we like our, actually I have a Crosby hook here as well. They said, we really like our Crosby hooks. The guys know how to use them. It's a beautiful tool in its simplicity, but we don't care for the weight. Can you make us an aluminum version? So that's what Dan's got in his hand there is what we call the Bantam, which is either when you look at it, is either just the aluminum version of this, or it's the Lightning GT and we've sawed the gate off it, depending on how you look at it. So also in that 6 ounce range, so nice and light. And I think there's something to be said about the simplicity of that bantam hook that Dan's got in his hand. The gate on here is cool. You can do a couple different things with it. There's some sort of like rescue type drills and things that it allows for. But if you're looking at it simply as purely an escape system, carry it every day, hopefully never use it except for training. I think the simplicity of the one Dan's got in his hand is pretty tough to beat.
I agree. So training, that's the biggest thing I want to touch on, and not my sales pitch, but I've always been there, and they say, I can only use the system once. So talk to us to debunk that. And you mentioned, oh, I can replace this tip. And someone mentioned to me, why would you have to replace the tip? It only can be used once. So
Sure.
what's the real deal?
Sure. So I don't know if anybody on this call is old enough, but there used to be, I believe, even written into the NFPA standard, and certainly within just standard practice, was that rescue ropes are only to be used once. And if they were used in a real rescue, and this is just regular rope rescue, your 1/2-inch static ropes, they were to be retired from service. That was done away with like 3 or 4 NFPA editions ago, which would make it 15 to 20 years ago. But that thought sort of carried through into the escape system world. And then there used to be a little bit of language in there in NFPA, which sort of implied that escape systems were a one-time use only. So at the end of the day, it's really up to us as the manufacturer to decide what that is. But that being said, there is language within NFPA now that backs this up, which is, yes, if you tie one end of this thing into a burning building and you jump out and lower yourself down to the ground, and now you're alive, but the end of your system is inside this burning building, then you should not use it again. So if you've used this in a real live fire escape situation, it should absolutely be retired from service. And to go with that, if you do that, call me and I will send you a new one. That's the deal. So if our equipment helps you to go home safe, we will more than happily switch it out for you and give you a new one. So I've only had to do it a couple times, sent 2 of them to Clackamas, sent a couple others to other places, but that's the deal. So along with that, the question becomes, can I train on it, right? And so the answer is yes, you can train on your, let's say, issued systems, the system that you would carry day in and day out. The caveat to that is it's going to be just like any other rope rescue training, where you'll need to inspect it and make sure that during training it didn't sustain any damage that would cause it to be removed from service. And you just need to be aware that when you use things, they get banged up and they get worked. So in a perfect world, you'd have some training units that are separate and they're just used for training, and you can bang on those as much as you want. Dan and I will probably talk about it a little bit. You're going to have a backup safety system in place when you're training anyhow. So you've got a higher tolerance for kind of wear and tear on the training gear. But we still sort of believe that you should take the system that you've been issued and you should jump on it at least once and make sure that it's all put together correctly, you know how to use it, and it's a little bit of packing your own parachute, and give yourself sort of that feeling of confidence that you know that the gear that you're carrying actually works and is properly assembled and deployed. Does that answer your question, Dan?
Yeah, no, absolutely. See, and you kind of brought me on the next path, which is, when training, we sell, a couple different belay systems, automated belay. I know Deus makes one. I haven't used that one. We use the Rogless from 3M through RPI, which works extremely well. But they're all $1,000 or so, if not more. So the Rogless I can get for $1,000, but Deus 100% is more. So my department says, hey, listen, I can't afford that. I need a belay system for my bailout training. And I'm going to get back, guys. I'm going to get back into the harnesses and all that in a minute. But Matt kind of touched on the belay. So what am I looking for when I do a belay? The Gree, the Munter, none of them are as good as a self-regulated, but they work. So yeah, if I'm going through Sterling, what rope am I going to buy?
Sure. So to your point, like I have a strong preference for an automatic belay system of some sort that takes the human factor out of it. So when we look at accidents, it almost always comes down to human factor. The equipment never fails.
Well, and that's why we have bailout systems the way we do, so that if you let go, it stops you.
Exactly right. So we like those automatic systems. To Dan's point, they're expensive for something that's pretty rarely used. One of my favorite safety systems I ever saw was somebody who actually had a pole vaulting mat below where they were training. And so, pole vaulters will take 20 footers, and we were coming out of a 15-foot window. So that was a great landing. So we like a nice soft padded landing zone just in case something goes wrong. But there's several, and we'll describe them as mostly like recreational rock climbing type devices. So the best example, probably best known, is the Petzl Grigri. Great device, been around for 30 odd years now, probably more. So for any of those sort of like manually operated devices, there's like two really key things to think about. One is, do you actually know how to use it? So we've certainly been called about training accidents that have happened. I'm sure Dan's had contact with folks like this as well. And we hear the same story over and over, which is
I don't use the term training and accident in the same.
Oh, sorry.
Sentence, but continue.
We say, what happened? They say, oh, we were doing XYZ. And we say, great. How did you train the guy who was doing the belaying at the time? And said, oh, well, essentially we didn't, is usually what it boils down to. Or he was trained extremely quickly and extremely poorly. So long story short, pick a belay system that you guys know how to operate and you feel confident in would be the first one. And then as far as rope goes, pick one that's compatible with the device. So they're all going to be stamped with what diameter rope works with them. So we'll pick one that works. 10 millimeters, pretty common for something like the Grigri. So for us, that's a Safety Pro or a Super Static in a 3/8 kind of size. And you want a static rope. We went through a phase in this world of belaying with dynamic ropes, which rock climbers would use. They're great. They're got a lot of shock absorption to them, nice soft catch. The problem is most of us are training out of like a 2nd-story window. So the way dynamic rope works is it stretches. So by the time the belayer reacts, locks the device, the rope goes tight, and then the rope stretches, and then the harness stretches. The guy's usually on the ground at that point. So we like a static rope whenever possible to just eliminate all that stretch that's in the system.
I did not know that. So if you're, if someone's on here saying I need a rope and they're Googling Sterling, what rope are you recommending?
So 10 millimeter Safety Pro is going to be my sort of like go-to for putting in a Grigri.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Awesome. Couple more things. And this was a question. We talked a little about NFPA when we one-time use. Talk about that 10-year cycle. What's covered in that 10-year cycle? What's not? What can Sterling do? I get to my 10-year and I'm really broke. What can I do to lengthen it?
Sure. So here's an escape system. It's got a couple different parts and pieces to it. So any of the textile goods, so the rope in here, or this one's got like a lanyard in it, or you're going to have a harness that it's attached to, whether it be made out of nylon, Kevlar, Technora, what have you, they're all going to have a 10-year lifespan from the date of manufacture, not the date that it goes into service, not the date you bought it, the date that it was manufactured, which is going to be marked right on there. So at 10 years, all the textile goods are done. So it's a pretty easy rule, fast and hard to remember. Textiles all have a 10-year shelf or 10-year life from their birth. That being said, hardware has an infinite life. So as long as it passes inspection, so if we have a carabiner, if that carabiner passes its inspection, gates open and close, it locks, there's no dents, there's no gouges in it, there's nothing, you can still read everything on it, all those things, then you can reuse that hardware. So we've been doing this long enough that we have a bunch of systems that have been issued for 10 plus years. Folks are cutting the ropes out of them, sending the hardware back, and we'll just sew new ropes onto them. So they're saving themselves the cost of the hardware replacement. So
you will do that 100%.
Yep, it's a little bit of a pain in the neck, right? So we got to take them out of service. Now you get guys running around with no systems. We got to coordinate the back and forth, but it's certainly possible. Just takes a little coordination. So the sort of downside to that is you miss the opportunity to potentially update to some newer, better equipment that might be out there. But if it's a budgetary constraint, or the classic one is we've already trained 500 people how to use this equipment, and the new equipment isn't good enough or different enough to justify retraining everybody on a new piece of kit. And that's a perfectly legitimate, logical argument. So yeah, we can certainly put new software into the existing hardware.
Okay, sounds good. And then the other thing you talked about, and maybe some of it stays within Sterling, some of it's a little bit out. You talked about the minimum NFPA requirement for rope being 7.5 mil. So I know RPI uses 6 mil. I know
Sure.
that there's some webbing out there from RIT. And you guys might make, I don't know if you make the webbing for RIT or not. Okay, but you make the rope. But anyway, RPI is 100% NFPA compliant and uses 6 mil. So how do they do that?
So there's two ways to certify something to NFPA for an escape.
And it's your rope. So, right.
Yeah.
So go into the details. Go into
Sure.
the gritty details.
So like this rope here, this is an NFPA escape rope, and it's 8 millimeter. So I can send it to a laboratory. It's always UL, and they do all the testing on it, and they say, yep, good to go. You meet all the requirements of an NFPA escape rope. I can send them this hook, and they'll put it in the machine. They'll do all the testing, and they'll say, yep, you've met the requirements of an NFPA escape hook. Everybody's happy there. So we can go through and do that with everything. We can certify each component of the kit. I can also send them the entire system like this, and they'll pull it end to end as a complete system, and they'll certify it as an NFPA escape system. So the individual components within the system don't necessarily need to meet the requirements of that similar component. So to your point, Dan, you can I say get away with, that sounds like a negative. You can use a smaller diameter rope in that system as long as it meets all the system requirements. So you can, if you could make the engineering work, you could use a 1 millimeter rope if you could get that to work for all the other heat resistance, strength, knottability, all these other requirements that are in there. But what they're doing is they're making sure that all those pieces together work properly and meet the requirements overall. So we can make a smaller diameter rope that still meets the strength requirement, 3,000 pounds. The reason they put a diameter minimum in there, like cannot be any smaller than 7.5 millimeters, was the idea of needing to be able to grip it with a structural firefighting glove on. Somebody somewhere decided 7.5 was the smallest diameter. But if we're doing it as a system, we know we have a descent.
Probably an Irishman, if I'm guessing.
But if we're doing it as a system, we know there's a descent controller in there. And so the ability to grip the rope is no longer as important, so on and so forth. So that's the answer. You can certify an entire system, or you can certify individual components. And those individual components can then be assembled together into, I guess, vocabulary-wise would be a kit rather than a system. We tend to use the words kind of interchangeably.
So let's go in. What are we hooking this into? We have a couple options. We got most likely class 1 belts or class 2 harnesses. So we have our system, we've got our hook, we've got our descent device, we've got our rope, but we got to hook it into something on us. So Sterling has one product from that, and then we'll talk about kind of the other items from that. I'm holding up the one product. It's nothing special. It's a belt. And I'll let Matt talk about it. But if you basically see, it's a belt with a clasp on the front, and then it's got 2 D-rings. One is stationary and one is able to slide. So what is this product? Where do you see people using it? Gem Tour's always kind of been the staple of the fire service, but honestly, thankfully, I'm seeing a lot of departments go away from it. So what's the Sterling belt about?
Sure.
Or any belt for that matter. It doesn't have to be a Sterling belt.
So NFPA defines harnesses as class 1, class 2, class 3. So class 1 is a belt, like Dan was just showing you. Class 2 is a belt with leg loops. We think of it as a seat harness. Class 3 incorporates the upper body too. So full body harness, class 3. In the escape system world, we really only talk about class 1, class 2. Nobody's running around in a class 3 harness all day. So let's go to class 2 harnesses. Dan pointed out the the sort of, I guess, classic FDNY harness is this blue and yellow arrangement from.
Yeah, I have a couple I'll talk about. I will 100% show you the RPI as well, because I think it's extremely well made and well designed. But the Gem Tour is what everyone knows as a typical class 2 harness.
Yep.
So
And I'll give you my own. This is opinion rather than fact.
Well, see, I don't mind opinion as long as you say this is opinion. So,
yeah.
And I might agree with you because I think I know what you're going to say, but go ahead.
So Gem Tour harnesses are really well known. We'll say Gem Tour Class 2 because the city of New York wears them. And the reason that the city wears a Class 2 harness is because they do harness stuff with it. They do the roof rescue evolution, and they do lots of things where you actually need to be wearing a true harness. What we encounter in our day-to-day is lots of folks who say, what I really want is an escape system option so that I can be safe at work. And as Dan pointed out, I need a way to connect that to my body. So they end up buying the same thing they've seen out there, which is a Class 2 harness. When in reality, you can quote unquote get away with a Class 1 harness, a belt. So if anybody's ever hung in a Class 1 harness, you can imagine it's a little less comfortable because it doesn't have leg loops that are supporting your weight. So it's kind of sucks up around your ribs a little bit, a little rough on the kidneys. I can tell you I've jumped out 1,000 windows in a Class 1 belt, and I'm still here to tell the tale. And the idea here is not that it's a harness that you're actually intending to hang out and do work in. It's a never in a career, hopefully, situation side of training. So when I look at it, I think you should look at the work that your department does and decide, is there value in having a Class 2 harness, which is going to be more comfortable to actually hang out in, or do I really just need something to connect my escape system to? And if you do, there's a cost savings on a Class 1. There's a comfort. I think anybody who wears a Class 2 day to day in their turnouts can talk to you about some of the weight being a factor for sure. And then just some of the impediment to movement, and also just a little bit of like snag hazards, things like that.
Yeah.
So the other thing that either of those will do is
continue. Go.
They'll give you a ladder attachment option. So if you work on ladders, great to have some sort of restraint system. You don't have to remember to take it out of the compartment on the truck and put it on, blah, blah, blah. So any way that you can tie off, make yourself safe, you're going to need some sort of harness. 1s and 2s are both acceptable. So that's my take on it. I think the vast majority of people that are wearing Class 2 harnesses probably don't need to be. And I think a Class 1 is a really good solution. Also, the belt that Dan was holding up, I can put that on any firefighter that I've ever met, and it'll fit. Sort of one size fits everybody. I can set it up to either a left-handed deployment or a right-handed deployment, all with one part number. So we outfitted the city of Charlotte, for example. So for those guys, they've got 50 belts sitting in a bin. And when a guy needs a new belt, pull a belt out of the bin, throw it on there. He's done and dusted in 2 minutes, as opposed to, oh, geez, so maybe you're like a size 1 or a size 2 or a left hand or a right hand. It just gets a lot more complicated in terms of sizing on there. So those are the reasons I like Class 1s. I'm not saying that nobody should use Class 2s. I'm just saying evaluate the work that you do and decide if that's the right tool for the job.
I'll just echo that because when I sell gear or anything, that's always, oh, we need Gem Tours. All right, great. What do you need Gem Tours for? And it's, oh, bailout. That's it. Okay, well, get a Class 1. And I think there's a lot of misnomers out there. The other thing we see in the Northeast a lot is internal harnesses, which is another, in my opinion, just debacle of kind of a decent idea, but just went completely haywire. So for those of you, I'll go on the gear route for internal harnesses. And correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. External harnesses 10 years also. Yep. Internal harnesses 10 years also. But once this is the big one. So the Gem Tour is a nylon harness. So nylon is obviously on the less expensive side. An internal harness, once it goes into the gear, it needs to meet the same heat, abrasion, everything standard of the gear itself. So you're going to pull out an internal harness. It's going to be Kevlar. It's going to be Nomex. It's going to be very well built, which is great until you realize the cost. And then you also have to realize where it's rubbing against. It's rubbing against both your outer layer and your moisture barrier. And so it does lead to premature gear wear before you get to that 10-year shelf life. Never mind the fact of having to swap it between sets of gear. Almost every department is trying to do 2 sets of gear. I don't think they're going to do 2 sets of internal harnesses. So having to swap that between the two is going to be a nightmare. So listen, I sell gear, I sell harnesses. I always recommend a class 1, or if you need a class 2, make it external. Do not, in my opinion, this is Matt gave his opinion before, my opinion, stay away from internal harnesses. They're more of a headache than they're worth. But again, just be aware of what you're actually using it for. If all you're using it for is bailout and maybe tying off to a ladder, there are very cheap ways to tie off to a ladder with a class 1 belt, and you're still protected. And, you know, if it hurts once you load it, well, we don't want to load it. Like, that's not our goal. So if we are truly planning on loading it, then yeah, maybe do a class 2. The class 1 is, hey, if we load it, the other alternative is falling to our death, right? So, you know, whether it be bailout or, a bailout or RIT or something like that, or falling off a ladder and it's tied off. So again, I just kind of gravitate back towards all that when we talk about harnesses, because that's a big topic. We want a harness. We've always had class 2 internal, so spec that. Well, why do you really need that? And sometimes I walk out of that conversation saying, hey, you know what? They're right. They do need it. But 99% of the time I walk out and they're like, you know what? We really didn't need that. That was a waste of money. And a class 1 would be perfectly fine. So based on that, we've done the system, we've done the harness. How are we connecting the two? And I bring that up because you held up the system before. There's a lanyard on there. So, and this is something where selfishly I've made some money on, because I've gone to departments that already bought systems, already bought harnesses, and didn't have the lanyards. And it was like found money for me, because I said, hey, you need that lanyard. Like, you can't use this without it. So, and all of this stuff, guys, tonight, I'm really trying to, and I don't know if we're doing a good job. I think we are, but if we raise any questions on what you're looking at or what you have, just reach out to me or Matt on the side, and we'll go through it with you. We can't go through every scenario tonight, but what I am trying to get across is that there's more than just going in and finding a part number and ordering it and having it delivered. You have to analyze what gear you have, what harness you have, what systems you're using, and all that stuff. So if you have questions after tonight, just come to us. But what are we talking about when we talk about connecting the system to the harness?
Sure. So the 99% of harnesses is going to be a steel D-ring, right? So we got to connect the escape system, the descender, to that ring. So the most common way we're going to do that's with a carabiner. Easy enough. Some folks have asked about like screw links and things like that. I believe you want to be able to get out of the escape system fairly easily, rather than a sort of semi-permanent connection. So carabiners, not too much to say about these, like NFPA certifications, all good. So sometimes this carabiner is going to be attached right onto the descent control device, and that's great. That works perfectly. Say in the last several years, we've seen a tendency to folks storing the escape system in their pocket on their turnout pants, and Dan will talk a little bit about integration and compatibility. But when they do that, the distance from that steel D-ring on your harness that you're connecting to where your system lives suddenly gets greater than if it were living on your harness or on your belt. So we need to bridge that gap between the two. So that's where something like this would come in handy. So this is the same fiber we used to make the rope, heat resistant, all that good stuff. And in this case, this guy here is actually just girth hitched on here. If you're forward thinking and you've talked to Dan ahead of time, so you know to order it this way, we'll sew it right on there. So it's permanent. Nobody can walk off with it. There we go. There's one.
Yep.
So you're good to go there. So the reason this is important is so that when you connect it to that D-ring, it doesn't pull the system out of wherever you're storing it, bag or pocket, whatever it is. And then you've got all this loose gear flopping around, snag hazard, just dragging around. However, we don't just put lanyards on everything, because some harnesses and belts, the Gemtor is a great example, has this A-frame sort of arrangement that sort of acts like its own extension in a way. And then if you stack an extension, a lanyard on top of that, all of a sudden the system is out of reach of where you can actually grab it and manipulate. So it's a matter of matching up the correct gear to what you have to make sure that it's all compatible and working correctly together.
Yeah, I can't stress that enough. So some of the scenarios, and it's impossible to cover every scenario, and I'm going to try to keep this moving, but some of the scenarios I've seen, a class 1 belt with no lanyard, suddenly when you put it in your pocket, the system starts to self-deploy. When you have a Gemtor and you're putting the system on your waist, it generally works pretty well. But if you're putting that system now in your cargo pocket with a Gemtor, sometimes you need that extension. The most important part, if you're a training officer or a chief and you're considering bailout systems, and what I've seen is some of the harnesses, some of the internal harnesses, what they'll do, they do not have a fixed A-frame to them. And so as you deploy it, they cinch around your legs. And they were originally made for like falling. And so you think about it, if you fall, you want your harness to cinch around you to make it tighter. So that was great. The problem was when they went to the bailout side, as they would exit the window, they would, and it's always hard to explain, but as they exited the window, the harness would start to cinch, but that A-frame would get larger and larger. And you would get to a point where your arm was fully maxed out, but the harness was not loaded. And guys would start to, and there were rotator cuff injuries, shoulder injuries, things like that, because the arm was trying to hold on the entire weight, but the harness was not grabbing it. And so all of this stuff we're not going to cover tonight. It's just, if you're looking at this, if you're looking at these purchases, make sure you do your due diligence and get someone educated in to talk. It doesn't have to be me, but get someone educated in to discuss all of these different options, because you don't listen. If you do bailout, every department I've been in, from every department, volunteer, career, you're going to have your guys that are 100% for it, and you're going to have your guys that are 100% against it. So if you do not do your due diligence and then you shell out a product where guys are pulling out rotator cuffs because this harness doesn't match this lanyard, it's going to go to the union and it's going to get kaput, and you're going to end up with it. So do your education beforehand. I'm not trying to tout us. We offer it. I consult more times than not and never get a dime from it, and that's fine. I want you to get the right system for yourselves and the right system for your department, and make sure that you have things that are compatible. That's the most important thing, because the only thing more expensive than buying the systems is paying for the medical bills and the overtime for guys that hurt themselves during training, honestly. So that's definitely a big part of this when we talk about compatibility. And then the non-injury side is just your pants open to this side, your harness opens to this side. What side do you wear your bailout system on? I don't think we need to get into that too much tonight. Contact us if you want more information on consulting on that, but I want to keep you guys safe. So definitely make sure your harness and your systems match. So where are we wearing our bailout systems, Matt? I know that, the Sterling bag here, you can wear in a couple different places, but I assume you sent me this for a reason. So talk to me about this.
Sure. So there's basically 1, 2, 3. There's 4 places essentially that you can carry an escape system. So the first one is you can actually have them from the manufacturer built into your SCBA. So that's an option that's out there. I will tell you it is not a very popular option. I think Dan probably sees the same thing. You don't see a lot of folks doing it, and which is sort of interesting. In my opinion, it's actually where it belongs. You know, we keep using the city of New York as an example, but those guys carry 4+ pounds around strapped to their leg for their entire 20-30 year career that hopefully they never use. And it's sort of like extra weight, extra hassle, right? So, and you're going to carry it.
Listen, I'll settle with the SCBA manufacturers getting SCBA right, and then we can worry about PSS on there. But
so
continue.
I'm fortunate in that I work only in like the theoretical aspect of this. So,
I agree with you.
So to me, like, great, you're going to go do interior structure for firefighting work. You're going to put an SCBA on. Let's include an escape system in that. Happy days, off you go. It just hasn't been engineered and designed very well, so they're awkward and difficult, and there's lots of hassles that go with them. But that is an option, just so you know that it's out there from I think all the SCBA manufacturers. So that's one option. The second option is what's called the lumbar system. So that's going to attach to the belt, whether it's a belt or the belt portion of your harness. Sort of rides. You can't see where I'm indicating, but rides kind of in the small of your back. And nice thing about that, distributes the weight kind of equally to both sides of your body. There's challenges there with how the SCBA sits on top of it, how you fit in the seat on the truck, and some other odds and ends there. But it's certainly an option. We don't sell a lumbar bag anymore, but folks do. They're available, and if it works for your department and your gear and all that, great. Third option is you can carry it kind of like on the waist, let's say, which would be, I guess, on the waist to the side as opposed to on your back. That would be New York City style. Those guys, sorry, left or right hand, Dan?
We're right hand, left hand on the hook.
Right. Okay. So strapped to their right leg, but kind of like hanging off the belt on the harness. Super common. Kind of, I'd say that's probably sort of the original carry style.
100%.
And then the one that we see the most these days, we've done all of these, but the one we see the most is people storing the system inside the cargo pocket on the bunker pants. And so the way that generally works is, I made a little bit of a mess here.
And while he's talking, a lot of gear manufacturers will make a specific bailout pocket on the right side too. So Matt's going to show you a pocket that goes in the pocket, but talk to your gear manufacturer. They will make or should make a specific bailout pocket for your side, whatever side it is as well. Which negates what he has to do here. And frankly, it's a better option. I mean, he's going to show you a great option if you have a cargo pocket, but if you can start fresh and get basically what he's showing you sewn onto the side of your pants, it's an even better option. So go ahead.
So like let's say 99% of turnouts, the cargo pockets are either 8 inches by 8 inches or 10 inches by 10 inches. So what this, zoom back a little bit here, sorry, it's kind of dark, but this is basically like a square bag, and it's got these 2 pockets in the front here that the hook is going to live inside of. And this whole unit will just drop down inside the turnout, the cargo pocket on your turnouts. You get your attachment up here, hook it onto the attachment point of the harness, and you're all rigged up and ready to go. Couple things. We always want the system to be permanently attached to the harness. So some folks say, oh, I'll take it out of my pocket, hook it up when I need it. Everybody we've talked to says this all happens so fast that you certainly don't have the time or the dexterity to actually make those fine, small connections. So we want it hooked up when you start your tour and you're ready to go. And then the other piece of that is it has to be organized in some way. So if you just take this kit and drop it inside the pocket of your pants, you're going to reach in there for the hook, you're going to pull it out, and you've got this rat's nest of rope and carabiners and other stuff, and it's just not going to deploy, quite frankly. So you're kind of stuck at the window with a bunch of gear that doesn't work. So what we like about this pocket bag insert arrangement here is we've lined the inside of it with super abrasion resistant material. So you've got all these sharp metal bits rattling around inside your gear. And if anybody has ever carried around a set of channel locks or a screwdriver in their cargo pocket will tell you the metal parts on the inside will soon work themselves to the outside. So we like to put in some extra durability reinforcement in there. So that's what we've done with this one. What we've realized is we've actually overbuilt this thing. So we the material we're using is the same stuff you make ribs, like rigid hull inflatables out of, called Hypalon. In the 10+ years we've been selling it, we've never had a single one come back for warranty, nor have we had anybody actually wear through and into the material of the bunker gear. So it's actually a little bit of overkill. So Dan's got the next generation in there. So I'll hesitate to say downgraded, but we switched it out for just a super rugged Cordura fabric. So a little bit less bulky. We lose a couple ounces out of it. So weight is the killer with all these things. And it's just a little bit simpler. So kind of stripped the design down a little bit, simplified it, lightened it up, and it should still have enough durability. So to Dan's point, if you can get the turnout manufacturers to make you a specific pocket, that's tremendous. The only thing I would caution you about is to make sure that you have them reinforce it pretty robustly. Otherwise, you'll be sending the pockets back for repair at a pretty steady clip as all this metal hardware in there kind of rattles around. So have them line it with air shield or whatever else, like, knee pad kind of fabric you've got available to you from that manufacturer, just to prevent you. It's foolish to take a set of turnouts, expensive turnouts, out of service for a pocket that's damaged, as opposed to the actual turnouts themselves. So make sure they're building you a nice robust pocket.
Without a doubt, because I mean, listen, FDNY says that they took their bailout pocket and made the flap removable so that you could take it off and throw it out the window. But what did they really make the flap removable for? Because it's a lot cheaper to replace just a flap. I can call the division and say, hey, send me a flap for a guy who wore through his, than the whole bag. So without a doubt, there's definitely that end of it. So what I kind of touched on it before, and we're going to wrap this up in a couple minutes, but issues that you've seen, obviously don't name the departments, but any horror issues with how they've spec'd harnesses versus turnout gear and bailout systems, or is there anything that comes to mind? Like, hey, I mean, I think I covered a lot of it, but you obviously have a wider range of experience. Hey, they did this. This is dumb. That type of stuff.
So I guess I'll sort of look at it two different ways.
Because there's way too much with bailout more than anything. 9 times out of 10, I get brought in after the systems are ordered.
Right. Yeah.
And then I get asked, hey, come train us on this. We bought it. And okay, but you really need a lanyard or you really need this. So what are some of the issues that you see on that end?
Sure. So the ones that work the best are exactly what Dan described, where I've only had this happen a couple times, but they're actually starting from scratch with a new turnout spec. And so we get to start right from ground zero and build the whole thing all at once. So that's ideal because you can make sure all the pieces line up the way you want them to. That, like I said, rarely happens. So the things we want to watch out for are, probably the biggest one is the right-handed versus left-handed carry. And that has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not the people using it are right-handed or left-handed. It has to do with how the harness incorporates with the turnouts. So the best example of that is for most turnouts these days, I guess the fly is going to be right down the center. And so most of your harnesses are then going to match that, where the clasp and the buckle is in the center. There's still quite a lot of either they sort of wrap around and close on the right hip or wrap around and close on the left hip. And again, you're going to match the buckle to that. So in that scenario, if you have a buckle on your left hip, there's also a bunch of other things that are going on there in terms of adjusters and things like that. And what it really means is you can't attach the escape system on the left hip if that's where the harness is closing. So you have to make sure that you're setting all this up such that the harness can be carried on the side where you can attach it. So that's probably the biggest challenge we run into is a left side, right side compatibility. Fortunately, with our system, it's pretty easy to unthread it and rethread it so that it can go right-handed or left-handed. But we've seen people buy essentially right-handed harnesses that have left-handed closure on their turnouts, and that's just a terrible mess. That's like a return and start over kind of situation. That's probably the biggest one. And then, as Dan mentioned earlier, that compatibility with how it's stored, whether or not it needs an extension lanyard on it, and then the compatibility is whether or not it's got an A-frame on the harness side of it. So those are probably the biggest ones to watch out for there.
And the biggest thing I see outside of bailout systems with harnesses, and as we said with Sterling, it's not a big deal. But Gemtor, communication with your salesman, doesn't have to be me, whoever it is, right hand versus left hand opening. Just make sure everyone's on the same page, because so many times I've heard I asked for a left hand harness, and oh, I meant the bailout system's on the left side, but the harness opens. So I'm not going to go into that diatribe tonight, because in the end, one salesman may communicate it different than another one, and neither one is right or wrong. Just make sure you're communicating properly on how
Word,
that is.
words and vocabulary matter on that one
Yeah,
for getting
without
what you need.
without a doubt. So it is 8:45, Matt. We're going to do 5-10 minutes on search ropes, and then we will close it out. So do you have any search ropes there? Do you want me to?
If you've got some, that'd be great.
Yeah. So talk about, where did Sterling get into search ropes? What are they? Go.
Sure. So search ropes are, generally speaking, the easiest way to describe it is the trail of breadcrumbs to find your way back out of the building. So the concept would be you'd anchor it outside the building, and then you're going to trail it along. It's usually going to deploy out of a bag, and you'll anchor it off at various points along your search. And then if you need to find your way out of the building, you can follow that rope back out. You keep a hand on it. So that's the concept. I would say, typically the idea is this is for larger areas where you can't search by just following the wall along with your hand as you normally would in kind of like most residential type structure fires. So we usually describe these as large area search kits. So more sort of commercial buildings, things like that. So the one Dan's got is a full kit that we sell. So it's got a snap hook on one end there that I think he's got in his hand. So just a pretty basic snap hook. You're going to pass that around a parking meter, door handle, whatever you got on the outside, clip it into the rope just to attach it outside the building. And then the rope itself is 7.5 millimeters. It's a blend of a couple things. It's got nylon, it's got Technora inside it for heat resistance, and it's got a reflective tracer that runs through it. So you can, you hit it with a flashlight or a headlamp, it's going to kind of pop out at you if there's any visibility. And then it's got this cone on it, which is what Dan was showing you there. So this cone that he's got there is at 25 feet from the anchor end of it, from where we attached it outside. And then it's a cone, so it's got a fat end and a pointy end. That pointy end is pointing out towards the exit. So if you encounter that with your hand, you can sort of feel it and you can say, okay, I got the rope, I want to head for the exit, I got the pointy end of the cone, I'm going to go this way. So it's a directional route finder.
No, go ahead.
If you keep going along, further along, if we got to
I'm
50
not going to
feet,
go further along, but
I was gonna say I won't make Dan unpack it.
that's right.
You're gonna come to 2 cones. You keep going to 75 feet, 3 cones. You get the idea. All the way out to 200 feet is what's in the bag here. So I'm not expecting you to count 6 cones at 150 feet and do the math and figure it out. 6 cones, you're pretty far in there. Less cones, you're closer to the door. So it's not necessarily that we're expecting you to do the math. It's more just a general indicator.
Listen, I mean, and I'll go. Listen, I carry this more now than I ever did. I hate the term search rope because I don't use it as a search rope in terms of, hey, go this way, go this way. You can read YouTube or see YouTube videos of guys tying it off and using taglines, and maybe there's the place for that. And, I'll certainly show you that. But where I use this for is, we don't know where the location of the fire is. We want to go, we use our cameras, thermal imaging cameras. We're going to navigate in that area. But just like we have a hose line to get our way out, that's what I use this for. I just use it as a way to get out, so that if I get in and I'm not sure where I am because it's a large area, it's a maze, I can drop my bag and follow my rope out. I have used it to the point, where Matt said, where I found the fire and I was able to communicate to the engine, I'm 75 feet in. And, that is not a 75 feet as the crow flies, but hey, you need 75 feet of hose from where I tied off to. The other thing he pointed out was, you're going to tie it off to something outside in the clean area. It doesn't need to be a substantial object like we are with bailout or a roof rope rescue. but it has to be a immovable object. I'm not going to tie it off to something that someone could come up to and just move away. The absolute, and I will go on my tangent, and this one's a training one, right? So I don't have it. The absolute most important part of this is when you buy this carabiner here has to be labeled. You have to put something here identifying the company that you are, because if two search ropes get deployed, let's say ladder 1 goes left and ladder 2 goes right, and both of them tie off to the same point, and then ladder 1 says, hey, I'm low on air, I need a fast pack, I need a rip pack, I need a mayday. Well, if I come up there as the fast truck and I've got two carabiners tied off and neither of them are labeled, literally 50-50 shot. So 100%, the most important thing when you get one of these, have to label them. We have two on our truck. One is labeled, ladder 2 inside team. One is labeled ladder 2 outside team. So you have to, that's the most important thing. I don't use nevers or always as much. Have to label these so that someone coming in for you, or say, hey, ladder 1, we found the fire, follow our search rope. Well, if there's two search ropes, you got to know which one to go to. So have to label that. That's my only tangent on search ropes. I hate calling them search ropes. If I come up with another name, I will advertise it. But for now, search rope is what it is. So sorry to take.
No. I'll pile on there a little bit too, which is there's lots, and as I said, first thing, this is not my area of expertise, but there's lots of different options out there for little taglines, and you can, branches that come off and things like that. And any of the trainings that I've been lucky enough to go to, it just ends up in a real rope spaghetti. Yep. And I think the benefit probably doesn't outweigh the hassle factor.
For the taglines. Yeah, I agree.
The tagline side of it. To your point about the difference between sort of a search line and kind of like a locating line.
Right. Yeah. So it's almost like a bailout line, like a horizontal bailout line, you know, but just know what you're getting into. Once you start taking these out, and I'm a huge proponent of them, but once this comes off the truck, your mindset has to change. It's not a private dwelling, 1,200 square foot, that if I run out of air, I'm just going to find the closest window. Things have to change. But on that note, the other thing I like to point out with this is it's a search rope. It's not a life-saving rope, but it's got a 3,000-pound breaking strength on it.
Like 4. Like so, if you got a guy through the floor or something like that, that's what you got in your hand. Absolutely.
Exactly. That's my point. Like we're never rating this as a life-saving rope, but just realize how strong some of these things are that we're dealing with. If you need to grab a guy and pull, make a 2-to-1 with it. The only hazard, the only issue you're going to have is with the cones in there, maybe getting caught up, but it's strong. Use it for what you need to. So
actually, you just reminded me of my other favorite point that I try to make with folks around escape systems, which is the vocabulary gets a little weird. We like to say escape systems. We say bailout systems. My personal vendetta is to change the name of these things to personal rescue systems. So we think of it as, how can I use this equipment to get me out of a bad situation? And I prefer to think of it in terms of, how can I use this equipment to help somebody in a bad situation, whether it be myself or somebody else. So, lots of potential situations in sort of that RIT side of the world, in terms of what can I do if I've got 50 feet of really awesome rope and a couple of bits of hardware in my pocket that maybe I don't have to wait for the RIT team to get there with the full kit or whatever it may be. So to Dan's point, there's been uses in the city where people use this equipment to keep themselves safe in situations that were not jumping out a window to escape a fire exactly. So how can I use this to keep myself safe? And I think expanding your thought process into, this is not just a one-trick pony, will give more value to 4 pounds of gear that you have to carry around.
100%. And at the same time, it's not something you can endorse, because as a manufacturer, you can't say use it for X, Y, and Z, and then if it's being sold for.
So 100% endorse it for any sort of life-saving application.
Okay, good. All right.
That's the line we're going to draw, and it's going to go back to the same thing. If you use it in a live fire to save lives,
No, without a doubt. Yep.
it's out of service. Give me a call. We'll send you a new one.
Awesome.
As easy as that.
Sounds good. Well, if anyone has anything else, put it in the chat. Otherwise, I am going to thank Matt for his time. Got it. Maybe not a newborn at home. 6 months now. I don't know how old.
Yeah.
So this got you away from bedtime.
Yeah, Charlie's almost 10
All right.
10 months.
10 months.
So,
all right. Awesome.
Yeah, he's doing awesome.
Guys, Matt is a huge resource. If anyone wants to reach out to him, just message me. I can tell you, before Flash Fire, I've run into him at shows. He's always been happy to answer questions, and just a huge resource. And again, I almost think of guys like him and Dan, as I was talking before, almost as bigger resources than a fire service guy that's into it, because they'll give you no bullshit. You know, they'll just say, hey, listen, this rope's good for this. You use it however you want. This, you know, I'm not a fireman. I don't know how to use it. This is what it's good for. Dan from UL, I remember him saying, listen, put water on the fire. Like, you're not gonna damage shit. And you'll get, you know, he doesn't care. He's not a fireman. So guys, if you have questions, please reach out. But Matt, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. I think this is great. And I'm sure I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'll hang out here for another minute or two and just see if anything pops up in the chat. But
awesome.
I really appreciate everyone taking the time, and hopefully you got some sort of value or education out of it, or at least spark some thought, hopefully, and help you make good choices down the road.
Like I said, I have one guy that I know him very well as a good friend. He's got some good technical questions for you that I wasn't even going to pepper in this seminar, and it's more on the high angle side. So sure. I'll hook you two up, and you can go from there. So
perfect. Yeah, happy to.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good night, and we'll see you for seminars in 2024.